The people of Paso are just fantastic people. They smile at each other on the street. I came here from New Jersey. If you smiled at someone on the street in New Jersey, you
Forget
might get
about it.
hit. Migrants are not rapists carrying sacks of fentanyl. They're young parents with little kids. I don't know. You can edit this out, but Joe Nangle said, You don't want to be a friar."
Why would I
He
edit that
said
out?
it.
Don't hold that against Joe. He tried to keep you out, and you still came. I'm gonna put you on the spot right away. Give me your top 4 Star Wars movies in order.
Top 4?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna go Empire Strikes Back, New Hope, Return of the Jedi, and then The Phantom Menace.
Oh, yikes! I had you with the first 2. I was with you, but I think that third pick is nostalgia because Return of the Jedi is not very good. Rogue One should be in the top 4 for
Rogue
sure.
One will be number 4. Yeah.
Yeah, I was not big on the sequels, but I kind of, I've said I liked The Last Jedi. I know it's controversial, and I did like The Force Awakens. I think the first ones are nostalgia. Obviously, A New Hope and Return of the Jedi are very good.
100%, 100%. But I like The Empire Strikes Back. I didn't like it as a kid, but now looking back, I'm like, oh, that one I enjoy more now.
You're showing your age because you didn't say The Revenge of the Sith, because I think anyone under 25 is going to say that's their favorite movie.
Oh, I just have so many issues with that.
But it brings Anakin to a close. It's got a nice arc. There's something to it that's pretty good.
I will admit, it's not as bad on hindsight as I experienced it at first.
Exactly. Order 66 is pretty formative for a lot of people, and it's a big moment.
Yeah, when Anakin shows up and opens his lightsaber to the younglings, I was like, what is happening right now? So yeah, that was dark.
Yeah, very, very dark. It's something that's very difficult for us as friars because everyone thinks that we're Jedi.
Yeah.
We kind of have to embrace it a little bit, but obviously we are not. I always like to ask the friars if they've had this experience. So this is the first question I'm going to ask our guest. But our guest, Jim McIntosh, he's a brother. He's been with us for many years as a missionary, working in our communications department. He's currently working in El Paso, working with migrants. We're so happy to have you on the show. Jim, do you think you're a Jedi sometimes?
Not at all. I'm a minor character.
Yes, minor character. We are the ones off to the side, not leading the battles.
True. So true. So many ways.
Now, Jim, you have an interesting introduction to the Friars in that your vocation story includes living with the Friars and, in fact, being a secular Franciscan. I don't know if we had anyone on the show that can quite say that. Could you start off with just saying, what the heck is a secular Franciscan?
Sure. Francis, our founder, Francis of Assisi, founded 3 orders. The first order was the Friars, us. The second order were the Poor Clares. And then the third order were people who wanted to live the vocation, but they were married, or they, for some reason, couldn't become a friar or a sister. And so they're Franciscans who live in the world. The Secular Franciscan Order is an order in the church. It's a secular order. But they're people who are married or diocesan priests or who are, for whatever reason, aren't friars or sisters, but they're still Franciscans. And we consider them to be members of the order. I mean, members of the family.
Yeah, John the 23rd.
Yep.
We had a pope. We had many popes, actually, who wanted to live a penitential lifestyle. So
Yeah.
am I getting a sense that, are you implying that you were married? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
No, I had undergone a conversion experience, and as part of that, I was working in the computer industry, but I decided that either the gospel was the gospel or it wasn't the gospel, and so I quit my job. I gave away everything I had, and
Wow.
and moved into a shelter in Washington. And as part of that, a friar who I knew contacted me and said that there was a small group who getting together to talk about forming an intentional community, and was I interested? And I said, sure. And so a group of about 12 of us met for a year, twice a month, to talk about experiences in community. And out of that, we formed the four of us got together and formed the Assisi community, uh, an intentional community in Washington, which is still ongoing.
Hmm.
And
I
we
mean,
picked the name Assisi community. So it was a Franciscan based thing from the beginning.
that's so I mean, I hear and I read many times in the gospel at mass, you know, sell all you have and come follow me. You know, those are the words that Jesus says. I never I don't I got to be honest, you know, even when I became a friar, I didn't sell everything that I had and came in, you know, it was a process. But you did it.
I did it for a while. I had nothing. Um, but it was interesting because I didn't know. I moved into a shelter or a transitional housing. It's like a shelter run by the Church of the Savior in Washington, and I was so innocent about the street. I didn't know. I didn't even know how to take a bus. I mean, I always
Oh
had a
wow.
car. And so actually, it was the homeless who really took me in and taught me how to live on the street and what to do and where to go and how to be careful um, and so the first year was living in the shelters. That was a learning experience of learning and learning about alcoholism. I in my family there was never any serious problems with drinking,
Hmm.
and so they taught me, about AA and about addiction, and um, it was we learned from the people we serve, and I certainly learned a lot from the homeless during that year.
Yeah, I'm curious because obviously you're living among them in a way that, frankly, I have not, and most people have not. But you're doing it voluntarily. You've got an education. You've chosen to give up all you have. I guess there's in the back of the mind the idea that you could leave and go back to your old life if you wanted. What's it like to really be in that world, but to have maybe a slight foot outside of it?
Well, Richard Rohr, in one of his early tapes, talks about how um, we can't be poor because we have an education. And so we have contacts, we have a safety net. It's no longer sufficient to be working for the poor, but we can be with the poor. And so, and actually, during the group that we met in talking about forming the CC community, I remember someone talking about the point at which voluntary poverty becomes involuntary. That as you proceed into it, you find that you have less and less of those safety nets available to you. But it's true. We have I have an education. So at any time I could go off and get a job and no longer live that lifestyle.
It's interesting the idea that voluntary becomes involuntary. That
Mhm.
just the fact that you've left the world, that you don't have those contacts, you don't have those safety nets. I had not really thought of it that way, and you took it to the extreme. I mean, what's it like to live in a shelter?
Well, it was transitional housing. So it was people who had been on the street who were in the process of going. They had gone through detox, but they were just beginning their journey out.
Mhm.
Um, and the Church of the Savior that I was associated with had the idea of setting up these Samaritan inns all around Washington, D.C. to get people off the streets. And we learned quickly that addiction is really ingrained. So I think all of the men that I lived with at one time or another fell off the wagon. That no matter how good, without a support structure, your boss yells at you, your girlfriend tells you get lost, whatever,
Mhm.
and it's so easy to go pick up a bottle. And so the whole organization shifted from that kind of transitional housing, get people off the streets, to setting up apartments. The buildings now they have are more or less permanent, where homeless live together. There's meetings on every floor to give them the support they need. But I was at the beginning, and we didn't know that much about. We thought we had a good idea that we get people off the street, but it turned out addiction was just much stronger than any of us had realized. But it was interesting living with men who were struggling with addiction, and particularly addiction that I didn't know much about. And then just their experiences on the street. A lot of recovery is telling stories. I mean, at AA, people talk to each other and tell stories, and so they would talk about their lives. And so I learned a lot about, their relationships with their families, things they had done that alienated them from their families. I remember one guy, he had, he was a family of 12, so he had 11 brothers and sisters, and he had lived with each of them, and from each of them he had stolen to buy alcohol. And so
Mm.
eventually each one of them kicked him out, and then the next one took him in. And so he went all the way through the 11 before he finally
Yeah.
ended up on the
It's good to
street.
have a big family.
Um,
Whew. Yeah.
then he came to us, and when he finally left us, all 11 came to help him move. I was so impressed.
Wow.
It was a great experience.
That kind of reminds me. Although it's different. Have you ever read Les Mis by any chance, or at least part of Les Mis? It's a very long
No.
book. The very beginning of the story is Jean Valjean having been given been released from his time serving a sentence for stealing, out of impulse, steals from a bishop who gave him a meal and a room for the night, but he had been kind of hardened by his experiences in imprisonment and the compulsion to steal. It doesn't, they don't use that language, but it's a compulsion. And what you're describing to me sounds a lot like that. And he has a breaking point when he steals from a child. It was completely unconscious. Like, he was sitting in this chair trying to reconcile the fact that he stole from this bishop. Then he gets caught. Then the bishop says, "No, I gave him those things. Go, you forgot these as well." And he gives him more. And then he's just sitting down, and this kid's playing with the coin, and it slips out of his hand. And out of reflex, as he's dazed, he puts his foot on the coin. And the kid's freaking out, like, "You've taken my coin." And I think there's something to that we don't really think about, that these things, these patterns in our life become compulsions that we have to really fight to unlearn.
Yeah, I mean, that's what
Yeah,
vices and virtues are. They're
Yeah.
learned habits. We train ourselves, and whatever comes natural is what we're going to do. And so hopefully our life as friars, as we put on this habit, we try to live our virtues as best we can, but
Try.
it's not just because of sheer willpower.
well, and when you factor in addiction,
Yeah.
addiction is incredibly powerful, and whether it's to heroin or meth or alcohol, or tobacco,
Hmm.
the drive to satisfy that need takes over.
Hmm.
Yeah, I had a spiritual director once say that we all have an addiction to sin. One way or another, there's something that we are addicted. Maybe it's just gossip. We build up habits that this is the way I act. And that's why he found the 12-step program helpful for everyone, is that the first
Hmm.
step, you've got to
Mm.
recognize that you are not strong enough to get over this by yourself. You got to submit before God and say, "Lord, help me. I'm not good enough." Did you find that that was helpful for you? You're seeing everyone else with addictions. Were there any kind of personal conversions in watching their stories?
Well, I mean, I was on this process of giving up everything, learning how to live on the street, learning how to live with homeless, and where the soup kitchens were, and um, so there was a development. And then once we started the CC community, um, my work shifted. I started working at the Quixote Center, and helping organizations that, because I had a background in technology, so a lot of groups were working with, the Guatemala Human Rights Commission did great work, but they had no idea how to set up, a computer, and that was back in, the IBM compatible days. I mean, it was the old computers. Um, my work shifted, um, but it was still a process of learning how to um, survive without the tech, um,
Hmm.
without a big job and a lot of money and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm. So, you're in this house, you're living in this community now, this intentional community with the CC, right? Or that you call the CC community. How it contrast to your experience of, like, living in the shelters? There, you said there was an intentional community there. What does that mean?
Well, an intentional community of people who want to live together, and we had spent a year talking to people who had lived all sorts of community experiences. We had a woman who had lived on the Catholic worker farm. We had people who lived in different communities around the world, actually. And the questions we always asked were, if the community collapsed, why?
Hmm.
If everybody left, the community
That's a good
dissolved.
question.
What factored into that? And if you left the community, but it's still ongoing, why did you leave? And so out of that, we learned a lot of ideas that help form the bedrock of our community, BC community, such as that community is most present at prayer and at meals, which as friars, that means sort of obvious to us, but we were learning. Um, and then that the prayer should be intentional. I mean, what I'm trying to say is somebody related one experience they had in a community experience where they started off doing Catholic prayer, but then people said, well, let's do a Buddhist reading, let's do a Hindu reading, and then it became so diffused that, as she said, what's the poor person going to prayer, and so
Yeah.
that was the reason she left the community. And so, we had a focus on prayer and a deliberate way of prayer. Not saying that everyone had to be Catholic or everyone had to be in line with us, but they had to accept that that's how we prayed, that we weren't
Okay.
going to get into other areas, other types of prayer, because we had this focus.
I think it's so important that prayer and community life, sharing those meals. In some ways, there's structure to it. You do things at certain times of the day, but in other ways, there's such flexibility to it that there's something about a meal that just unfolds. That sometimes it lasts 10 minutes, sometimes you just sit around for 2 hours. And then some of my best friar experiences have been around the table. Someone brings out a bottle of wine, someone makes some pasta. 2 hours later, you're still laughing and sharing stories. Did you find that was an important experience in the community?
Oh, definitely. And the CC community, there was a core community. Actually, when it was just Joe Nangle and I were the first two people who moved in, and we moved in on October 4th, the feast day of St. Francis.
Fitting.
And then on December 2nd, the anniversary of the church women in El Salvador being killed, we had we went to a prayer service, and a friend of mine said, "You guys have a big house, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah, we do." And he said, "Well, there's a Salvadoran family. They're undocumented. They're being kicked out of the garage they were living in. Can you guys provide space for them?" So actually, the next group that came to the house were a family of Salvadoran refugees.
Wow.
So the community from the beginning was always welcoming. So
Hmm.
we always had guests. We always had people coming to dinner, and then listening to their stories and their perspective and their life experiences. What life was like, and what their work was. Yeah. So the time there was very stimulating, very challenging.
So you live in this
So
community.
yeah.
You're a secular Franciscan already. You're living poverty.
No,
You're living prayer.
no,
You're
no,
not
no.
a secular yet.
No.
Oh.
I was just a layperson.
Okay, so you're a layperson.
Um,
How do you get into the seculars at this point? Your next step.
well, I said I wanted a commitment. I wanted because like we said before, there was always the possibility tomorrow I could go get a job somewhere, and so I wanted some kind of commitment to a gospel life. And so I talked maybe the friars, but at that point. Um, I don't know. You can edit this out, but Joe Nangle said, You don't want to be a friar." The
Why would I edit
he
that
said,
out? We'll hold that against Joe. He tried to keep you out, and you
you
still came.
Oh.
he said you don't want to be a friar. And his experience was, he was living with us in a community because the friaries he had been in did not meet his needs. And what he said was, after dinner, everyone goes to their room. They all have their own TVs. There's not really a common life. Um, and so you really don't want that. And in the Aziz community, we had one TV. It was in the living room. Nobody had TVs in their room. We were living very simply. We were trying to live as basically as we could. Um, but I wanted some kind of commitment. And so when I heard about the secular Franciscans, I decided that that might be a way to make a permanent commitment to being a Franciscan. And so we had three other people who were interested. And so we needed five to form a fraternity. Well, we went around and visited secular Franciscans in the DC area to find one that might mesh with where we were. And the people I was journeying with were very involved with the Nevada Desert Experience, which was a Franciscan effort to protest against nuclear testing, which was still ongoing then
Yeah.
in the Nevada desert. And so they were, social justice kind of people. And so we visited a lot of fraternities in DC, and we couldn't find one we liked. A lot of them, even today, some Franciscan fraternities and have more happy death societies, and not as ministry
Active.
directed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think you're gonna have to explain Happy Death Society to some people.
Well, it's just people, some fraternities, people join when they're in their 50s, say, but they're aging out. And so they're more, as they age, they get more introspective and they're more directed at a personal piety
Yeah.
than an apostolate ministry. So we decided that we'd start our own fraternity. So we went through a 2-year process of forming ourselves as Franciscan. We had a TOR friar, a third order regular friar, Kevin Quayle, who helped form us. And we formed the St. Anthony of Nagasaki Secular Franciscan Fraternity in DC, which is still ongoing. So it was a way for me to make a commitment to the Franciscan life. And so I was a secular for the next 10 years.
I mean, God bless you. That's I've known several friars who've had great relationships with the secular Franciscans. My experience previously had been similar to what you described before, as a Happy Death Society, but knowing through you and other friars that there are Franciscan secular communities that are active, that are living a sense of mission, in many ways challenges me to kind of reflect on my own life and go, how am I living mission? How am I, seeking to not just go through the motions of being a friar, but seeking a depth of relationship like they are, and in an intentional way.
I would say there are good fraternities. I think if someone's interested if someone doesn't want to be a friar, but they want to be a Franciscan, the secular Franciscan order is a great option. But you may have to look around to find a group that you mesh with, that
Or do what
meets
you did.
your needs.
You look around
Start
and
your own.
you find some
Yeah.
like-minded people. I don't think we all want to be our own leaders, but you find someone who can lead you to form something new. It's wonderful. I love the initiative. And it's interesting because, kind of going back to my question I preemptively asked, you're living as a friar life. You're living a Franciscan life, at least. You're living poverty, you're serving the poor, you're living in community. Now you're a secular Franciscan. You kind of got it all, right? You got your life figured out. You do this for 10 years. Why do you need to be a friar? You even had a friar tell you not to be. What pushed you over the edge?
I think it was just the need for a deeper commitment. The secular Franciscans make promises to live their rule, but vows are different. Vows, I think, are more solemn. Well, we take solemn vows, so it's a deeper level of commitment. I was working at that time at the American University as the director of system software. And in 1995, the internet was just starting, and it was
Thank you,
in
Alcor.
educational institute. Huh? Yes,
So
Al
thank you,
Gore.
Alcor.
It was in universities. It was in defense contractors. But there really wasn't a .com yet. It was .edu and .org, and so I wrote a little pamphlet, a little report for the National Fraternity of Secular Franciscans about electronic communications and how Franciscans should start using. And this was before the web. This was when there was email. We didn't have the web. We had something called Gopher, which was like a pre-web.
Hmm.
But it was talking about how Franciscans could communicate through electronic communications. And so I printed this up. I sent this to the National Fraternity, and then different people made copies. And then Mike Sarufka, who I know you guys have talked to previously, was at that time working for the General Curia, the JPSC, the Justice and Peace Office of the General Curia, and he was there for 1 year to go around and promote Franciscans International.
Oh, we heard all
NGO
about
at
how
the
he
UN.
founded the UN. Yeah, he founded it.
Okay. So he said, can I print this up? Because at that time, his province in Pulaski had a printing press. And I said, sure. So he printed it up. It looked very nice. And then as he went around the world, he dropped off copies of
Wow.
my little pamphlet. And so for years, I was like, people would like, oh, are you the Jim McIntosh? I said, well, I'm a Jim McIntosh. I don't know if I'm the, but a lot of people had read that and then started. So anyhow, in 1995, Mike contacted me, and the Justice and Peace Office in Rome was going to have the first Congress of JPIC. A Congress in our order is when there's one friar from every province. So it's like about 130 friars get together, in this case, to talk about justice and peace. And so they said, we'd like you to come and talk about what email is. And,
Oh my gosh.
talk. Yeah.
Yeah.
But 1995, that was, it was revolutionary.
Well,
And so they said,
it's funny you say this because in 3 days I'm going to Italy for basically the same thing. I'm giving a talk on how to use social media. So the more
there you
things
go.
change, the more things stay the same.
Exactly. It's ongoing. So they said, if you come and give a talk in Korea, you can stay with us that night. The Congress is 3 weeks. You can stay with us for the whole 3 weeks. We can only pay half of the airfare. And I said, wow, a 3-week trip to Asia where I had never been. And all I have to do is give a talk for an hour. And I only have to pay half of the airfare. So I went to Korea. And then that was 1995, August 1995. So they said there's a group of us also going to Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1995, 50 years after the bombing, and then to Nagasaki on August 9th. Do you want to come with us? So I said, sure. So I ended up going to Asia for a month. And then I got to visit Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the anniversary of the bombings, and then the 3 weeks in Korea. And that was really the first time I had lived or spent any time with friars. So all I had really heard about was Joe Nangle's experiences, which were not positive. But, I lived for a month with friars, and Justice and Peace friars tend to be younger and more active. And so it was a great group of guys. So that's when I first started thinking about it, making the switching from the third order to the first order. And then John Quigley, who was at that time running the Justice and Peace Office in Rome, asked me to go to Rome because the General Curia at that time, the extent of their computation was they had a Wang word processor. And so he said,
what's that?
I'd like to set up a local area network in the Justice and Peace Office so that we can share files and print to one printer from all these computers. And so could you come over and install a local area network? So I went over to Rome, and he paid for that airfare and put me up at the General Curia.
You're talking about this like it's the Stone Age, but it's like 30 years ago. It's amazing how far we've come technologically, that you set so much of the stuff up that now we're so far beyond. The world continues to change.
Oh, yeah. At a rapider and rapider pace now, when you see AI coming and everything else coming. And
yeah. I mean, that's not even Tito
so
up there. That's just a projection of it.
I froze. Sorry. No, but that, it's so funny. Brother Casey and I ran into someone at VidCon where we were last weekend. Yeah. And she looked at us and she goes, I deal with old technology. You guys don't know. And fortunately, I'm just old enough and my dad was just cheap enough that I was able to understand some of her references. But yeah, you're making some references that, definitely are stretching my memory here. and that has
Wang word processor.
Right.
Never heard of
I
that one.
mean, yes, same here. I mean, I had a DOS operating system, but I went from there to here really quickly.
So let's
So I
take a
installed the local area network, and then John Quigley said, have you ever thought of being a friar? And I said, well, in the back of my head, but not seriously.
Hmm.
And then so he turned my name into his vocation office in Cincinnati,
Hmm.
and so I started talking to their vocation people, and it got more and more serious. Um, and then, but I thought to myself, do I really want to live the rest of my life in Cincinnati? So I contacted the vocation people at Holy Name Province, and then the rest is history.
Yeah. So you join the Friars, and you have a new experience. So you've been working with computers, you've been working with people in AA, living in the poor and community, but then you get sent abroad. What was it like when you first went to South America?
Well, at that time, the province was sending all the right after vows. So the ex-novices, the simply professed, were all sent to Cochabamba to study Spanish. Um, and it was I'd been outside the country. I'd been to Korea, I'd been to Italy, I'd been to Europe, but I'd never been to what we call the third world or the developing world. Um, and so going to Bolivia was a bit of a shock. It's 65% indigenous.
Mm.
It's the poorest country in the hemisphere after Haiti. Um, it's I think 5% of the roads were paved. It was a
Wow.
poor country,
Yeah.
and so learning to navigate, number one, in a culture that wasn't mine, in a language that wasn't mine. Um, it was a challenge, and one of the benefits of going to Cochabamba is we lived with the simply professed of the Bolivian province, so we were peers more or less. Um, but they showed no mercy. We weren't allowed to watch TV in English. Everything
Ooh.
was in Spanish, and it was sink or swim. But that's how you learn a new language. That's how
Hmm.
a baby learns. A
Hmm.
baby wants milk. It struggles to figure
So
out
you
how to
cried a lot.
communicate
Okay.
that. It was learning how to do everything. As well as just common sense stuff in the developing world. You don't drink water, out of the tap. You don't eat lettuce from street vendors. You learn to navigate how people live in the developing world.
I get this strong sense like you can feel the Holy Spirit moving in your life along this journey where you're inspired to kind of make this radical change, and you do. And it's different from anything you've ever experienced. So people had to show you how to do it. Had you not done that, do you think you would have been able to survive sort of this trip, to, a developing nation like that?
Well, if I hadn't if I had stayed in computation
Hmm.
and I was before American University, I was working for computer manufacturers. So I lived in the Silicon Valley. It was fairly high level computation. I probably would have just continued in that and ended up being rich.
Okay.
Um,
It's fun to think about
I
sometimes,
Yeah.
be
especially
a
when
whole
you're in
different life.
Bolivia. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the whole thing has been a process, hopefully guided by the Spirit, um, that has been a deeper and deeper process.
But I
But
think as
it's
Tito was trying to indicate, you were probably prepared for it a little bit given the life you had had before, and yet there's really nothing that can prepare you for quite this culture shock of living at is like 14,000 feet, a lot of it,
Oof,
or
yeah.
it's something very high.
Cochabamba's 8,500, so it's not bad.
8,500. Sorry, the
Um,
peaks are, yeah, Cochabamba's a little lower, but still
La
8,500 feet.
Paz,
Yeah,
yeah, La Paz is 12,500. So
12,500.
La
Yeah.
Paz in Bolivia and I went up and stayed in La Paz for a month, and that was the altitude was challenging. Yeah.
So you got the altitude, you got the poverty, you got the language. I mean, I don't think anything can really prepare you for that. Were there moments where you say, "What the heck am I doing right now?"
No, because it was. I mean, I jumped in. One of my classmates had no interest in being with. He was there for the Spanish,
Hmm.
and when we came out of the door of the friary, to the right was a nice plaza and a McDonald's, and to the left was what they call the cancha, which is a ballpark, but it's in Cochabamba. It's a huge outdoor market that extends for kilometers. And when we went out the door, he would always go right to go to the McDonald's, and I would head left and head into the cancha. So it was just a matter of perspective. I wanted that challenge. I wanted to learn more. The music, the food, everything was new. So it was an opportunity just to have all these new experiences. No, I relished it.
And you learned Spanish?
Más o menos. I mean, I was 42. I was very late vocation. So that's why I went back to Cochabamba the following summer. I asked for permission to go back because my Spanish I felt was not. It was very primitive, and the second year really helped a lot to make it more fluent.
Yeah, that was my experience of living abroad. That first year, you're really just kind of getting the hang of it. And then that second year, that's where it really kind of seeps in and it starts to become almost like a second skin.
I think there were, in Bolivia, the people from the Andes who tend to be Aymara or Quechua are called Coya. And the people from Santa Cruz, which are more they're not. They're the other indigenous groups, like the people from the jungle, from the Amazon, and they're called. I forget. I got this out, but anyhow, in Bolivia, there's two groups. There's the Andean people, and then the people from the Amazon basin. And I had never realized there were two different groups that are so culturally different. The friars, because they knew me, they invited me to more things. So in Bolivia, there's the night before someone's birthday, there's a whole ritual where the person pretends to go to bed, and then all the friars come and they play guitars and they sing Las Mañanitas, and then the friar, after a few minutes, he pretends like he's coming to the door, sleepy, and then everyone goes into his room, and he just happens to have a lot of beer and a lot of fried chicken, and everybody has a party to celebrate his birthday.
Yes.
I didn't even know
I'm all
this
for it.
happened my first year. I didn't even know this happened my first year there, because we were studying Spanish and we didn't have the connection with the friars. My second year, they invited me
Nice.
to come to these serenades. So I had a closer connection to the Bolivians, especially to the friars, the second year, and learned a lot more about the cultural stuff as opposed to just the Spanish.
What I'm really interested in here is just knowing about you. So you decide not to be ordained, which is part of our vocation. Is some people are lay people, some people are lay brothers, and some people are ordained priests. You're not ordained, but you spent 2 summers or 2 years now in Cochabamba. What at that point were you thinking about? Were you thinking about becoming ordained? Were you thinking about working with migrants? Why are you there?
No, I never felt a priestly calling. I never felt, and in fact, I would be a terrible priest. It's
Good
not
to
my
know our
vocation.
skills. Yeah.
Exactly. I know great priests. I know great confessors. But for me, sitting in confessional, listening to other people's sins, I'm not
Not for
interested.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't want to be the center of attention, standing at the altar with everybody looking at me. I just don't have those skills. I don't have a lot of skills in that area. So I was thinking, as a friar, we have St. Francis Inn. I could work at this. I had the background with the homeless. I had the computer skills. Later, Eddie Coughlin, when he was provincial secretary, said, we used to talk about, we can't wait to get Jim in the provincial office because then he can do all the computerization for us. But
Joy.
by that time, I had gotten back from Bolivia and I was not interested in working in a provincial office. But no, our ministries, except for the priestly ministry, friars do everything. They're school teachers, they're nurses, we can do any kind of job. And so I had a lot to pick from, but I really had no interest in the priestly ministry.
So you go back then. You go to Peru. Is this right? How does this fit into
Yeah.
your
So
timeline?
so I our formation at that time was in Silver Spring, and it's normally 3 years in Silver Spring, and then a fourth year of ministry. But I already had my bachelor's degree was in theology. And so I didn't need, and I wasn't interested in the priesthood. And so they basically said, get some kind of certificate. So the second year at Holy Name, I studied at the Washington Theological Union and got the certificate in Franciscan spirituality.
Mm.
And then they basically said, okay, you're done with formation. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to go back to Bolivia. And they said, well, that's a different province and you're in formation and you have to be with one of our formators. But we do have a presence in Lima. So are you interested in going to Lima? I said, certainly. So I went to Lima, 2 years simply professed, and then worked there for 4 years. I was there 2 years simply professed and 2 years solemnly professed. And by just coincidence, our place in Lima at that time had been a parish that Joe Nangle had founded.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I had heard a lot of stories about Lima, and then he came to Lima from Bolivia, so I had heard a lot of Bolivian stories from his time.
Hmm.
So I ended up living in the parish that he founded, and one of the great things they had done in that parish, it was in a rich area of Lima, and they had built a parochial school. It was a massive complex. It was a whole city block. Um, but what they did right from the very beginning was they taught the rich from, I don't know, 8 in the morning till 3. Then there was a break when all the rich kids went home, and then they had what they called the Vespertina, the afternoon school for the poor,
Mm.
using all the facilities that the rich kids had paid for. So they had
Okay.
language labs, they had
Yeah.
computer labs, they had all the facilities of the high school, but it was for the poor. For it started out being the maids and the servants in the
Hmm.
neighborhood, but it became just an open high school for anybody who couldn't afford tuition at a normal high school, but wanted a more intense education.
Well,
And
what a
so
great
I worked
Franciscan thing.
there.
Yeah.
Seriously.
What'd you do there?
Exactly. So I worked there with the professor who was teaching computation because my Spanish was still in development. And so I was like a TA for his class in the Vespertina. And so that was a big part of my work there. There was a group of, in Latin America, there's something called JUFRA, Juventud Franciscana, or which
Mm.
is Franciscan youth, which are sponsored by the secular Franciscans. And there had been a group of JUFRA at a different parish, also run by one of our friars. Um, and that group had aged out of JUFRA, but they were still a core group. By this time, they were getting married and having kids, but they wanted to become secular Franciscans.
Mm.
And so I became their spiritual assistant and helped them go through formation to form as a fraternity of secular Franciscans, which was interesting because they were very young, they're very active, they were very um, yeah, involved. They were very energetic, motivated. So it was great working with them too.
So you go from working with the school, and working with computation. Then you kind of help establish a community similar. I would guess like a Franciscan community similar to what you've established in the DC area. And what I'm curious about is Ufra or Jufra as it is in Spanish hasn't quite taken off here as it has in other parts of the world. Do you think that there is a way for it to kind of connect in our culture? Do you think it has to be adapted, or do you think it's just, kind of a foregone conclusion we're culturally different in that regard?
No, no, I think it's a great resource. I'm surprised that there aren't more Franciscan parishes that adopt a Hufra or Eufra component because
Mm.
they have all the materials for youth ministry with a Franciscan bent, and
Mhm.
so I'm really surprised that in this country it never really took off, and yet we have all these parishes around, and they all have youth groups,
Mhm.
but they aren't Franciscan youth groups.
Right.
But I'm currently a spiritual assistant of a fraternity here in El Paso, and they want to start a UFRA group in their parish, in the parish where we meet as a fraternity. So I think that's a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to hoping that takes off.
I think it's a great transition because I want to talk about where you are right now, which is a bit unique in that you formed this community recently. It was not an established community. It was not something we had a provincial relationship with and you were assigned to. You kind of took it upon yourself to follow a dream or a hope. Tell us a little bit about why you're in El Paso.
Well, I was in a parish in New Jersey. I was not ordained. We had COVID, and so there weren't any soup kitchen Patterson, New Jersey, because of COVID. So I was doing a lot of live streaming and working on their Facebook page, but it wasn't really an intense ministry. And then there were three friars in Elfrida, Arizona, and one of them, a Japanese friar, his mother was ill, so he went back to Japan to be with her. Another friar needed a knee replacement. So there's one friar by himself, and they said, could you come out here for a month? Because as friars, we don't like to live alone. And so could you come out to Elfrida and be with him? So I went to Elfrida, and we were working in a little migrant center in Agua Prieta in Sonora, Mexico. And it was mainly dealing with people who had crossed the fence and then had gotten caught and were tossed back. So it was primarily, I would say, young adults, and there weren't many of them. We were getting maybe 10 or 12 a day, some days none. And so anyhow, I was there for a month, and then I said, this is much more, I can do much more here than I was doing in New Jersey. So I talked to the pastor guardian, and then I talked to the provincial, and he gave me permission to move to Arizona. So I ended up being in Elfrida. I was there for about a year, and every year in November, the bishops of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, which are the two cities that are divided by the border, build an altar in the middle of the Rio Grande and have an international mass. And the bishop of Juarez comes in from the Mexican side, and the bishop of El Paso comes in from the U.S. side, and they can celebrate a mass right in the middle of the river, right on the border.
Wow.
So we came over to attend that mass, and we just realized that the needs in El Paso were just so much bigger than they were in Agua Prieta. And so we talked about it, and ended up, two of us moved here to work with the migrants here. And here we're dealing primarily with families. We got the other day, we got 60 migrants in a little shelter. Our typical, before the Biden closing the border, we were getting probably 30 a day. And that's just a portion of the hundreds of migrants that El Paso is dealing with at different shelters. So it just became, the need here was just so obviously greater than it was in where we were in Elfrida. And at that time, the three of us were going to come here, but one friar, his mother got sick, so we decided to go be with her. And so two of us ended up moving here to El Paso. So we've been here a year. We've been working in a shelter. We don't run it. Our rule says we don't run things. We just work at things. So we work at a shelter that's run by a conventional friar, from Poland.
So inspiring about it. Yeah, you don't run it. You're not the parish priest. Right. You're not padre. You're not the one in control. You're living a very different life than I think a lot of people imagine with friars, which is that you're just there to serve and you're just a part of the community in a very kind of blending in way.
With the help of the province. I mean,
sure.
We're not making any money, and we're volunteering. So the province very generously offered to fund new communities for their first year in existence. Now we're starting our second year, so we'll see what happens. But they're sending us more friars. So we're getting a student friar for the summer. Fantastic. So we'll have a friar from San Diego for a month. And then we were assigned a friar at the congresses, where friars are assigned places.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be getting a friar in August, and then a friar who's currently a missionary in Honduras. His sister has some health issues, and he's a day away from the airport in Honduras. He wants to be closer, so he'll be moving and joining us in October.
Cool.
So we're going from two of us, so we'll have four by late fall. So the community's growing, but still with the help of the province, because we're volunteers basically.
Yeah, and that's such a place that's in desperate need, as you mentioned, of service, of kindness, of hospitality. There's a student actually who recently graduated from Siena, who I knew through our Damietta Center, and she has gone there several times to help do mission work. And it's a place like you're describing, where they just help the migrants, they help people who are coming in. They, give them a bed for a couple of nights. They give them some food, some water, and then they help them get on their way. And she was so moved by that experience that she created a mission trip for other students of Siena to go and experience it.
Oh, that's great, because there's so much miscommunication or bad communication or outright lies about migrants and what's happening with the migrants. That we have, the Annunciation House has what they call they have long-term volunteers who come for a year, but they have what we call short-term volunteers who come and live with us for 2 weeks. And as they leave, I always say, go back and tell your friends, these migrants are not rapists carrying sacks of fentanyl. They're young parents with little kids. These are the migrants. And to hear their stories, what they're going through and what they're fleeing from and what they've had to go through to get here. And to realize that as bad as all that is, where they're coming from is worse.
Yeah.
I had one woman, she said, Venezuelan woman, she said that when Venezuela, before Hugo Chavez, when it was one of the thriving countries in the hemisphere, she said we had a business, we had cars, we vacationed in Europe. And with the collapse of Venezuela, she said we were reduced to eating grass just to have something in our stomachs. And so you hear these stories of what pushes them to leave their homes, and whether it's climate change or cartels or just hunger.
Such desperation.
A huge amount of people are just on the move. There's over 1 million Venezuelans living in Colombia. It's just amazing, the people, and to hear the stories. They cross the Darien Gap, and what they have to put up with to get here, and then you realize that what they went through is not as bad as what they're coming from, because if it was, they'd go back. It's just incredible. And little kids, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is.
Well, Jim, what I love about your story is that it's all about accompaniment. You have some skills. You were the head of tech in some ways, and you had a lot to offer, and you've shared what you have to share. But it doesn't seem like your life is about going around telling people what to do, or being in control, or setting your own path necessarily. It's about going where other people are and simply listening and walking and sharing their lives with them, which is, I think, such a beautiful Franciscan charism. Would you say that's right, that your life is largely about accompaniment?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's what we do here. We get 20, 30 migrants a day, new families coming in. And one thing about our shelter, as I said, is run by a conventual friar, but everyone there is a volunteer. There's no paid staff. We're all there because we want to help and welcome our new neighbors, to work with the people coming in. El Paso is an incredible city. I love El Paso. I love the people here. The temperatures can be a bit hot, and it's part of Texas.
Oh my!
But
it's dry though, right?
It's a dry heat.
Who cares?
But when it's 104, 105,
Yeah.
it's hot.
Yeah.
But the people of El Paso are just fantastic people. They smile at each other on the street. I came here from New Jersey. If you smiled at someone on the street in New Jersey, you
Forget
might
about
get
it.
hit.
What do you want?
But here, people just they look out for each other. The friar I'm with went to the doctor, and he had I don't know, they took a test or something, and they had him wait in the lobby for 5 minutes. He was sitting in the lobby. A couple left, got in their car, and then came back, and they said, "Can we drop you off somewhere?"
Huh.
And that's typical for El Paso.
Wow.
People in El Paso just help each other. And so we have probably 40, 45 volunteers that come in, most of them once a week for a 4-hour shift. But they're all volunteers. They just want to help. We get donations every day of clothes, shoes, because as they get processed, they get everything taken away from them. All they come to us with are some dirty sweat clothes. And that's it. They have their cell phone, they have money and their passport. Everything else they own was taken away from them.
Wow.
So one of the services we offer is giving them a new set of clothes. And the people of El Paso just continually donate clothes, shoes, whatever the people need. So it's been a great experience of just being with, like you said, accompaniment, being with people, walking with them, and really treating them as humans. They've gone through, they've walked, some of them from different parts of South America all the way to the border.
Yep.
They may have been tossed back a couple times. They've been beaten back by the Texas National Guard, but they somehow made it through, and then had everything taken from them. And so we just treat them as, bienvenidos, welcome. Let's get you some new clothes. Let's get you some food. Let's get you in contact with your family so they can buy a ticket to wherever it is you're going. And just just being there for them, being available. We don't have money. We're not a paid staff. We don't have funds, but hopefully they have a family, they have relatives, somebody who's going to pay for their transport out of El Paso to wherever they're finally going. And a lot of what we do is just coordinate, helping them connect, getting them to the airport, getting them to the bus station, and just being there for them.
Well, Jim, thank you so much
Yeah.
for joining us, and thank you for your life. What a witness this is, that you have been so many places and you've cared for so many people, and we really can't wait to see who you're going to care for next. Did anything on the horizon? Any new ideas?
Well, it is. In Francis's testament, he says the moment of conversion was when he went among the lepers, and that's when what had formerly seemed bitter became sweet. And so, in my life as a Franciscan, both as a secular and a friar, I've always tried to look where the lepers are. And the homeless, a lot of times they're demonized or criticized, or and right now in our society, migrants are the lepers of today. And so we don't know what's going to happen. Biden closed the border. Our numbers dropped drastically. We were getting 30, 40, up to 60 migrants a day, usually families of 2 or 3. And now we're getting maybe 20 every other day. So we don't really know what's happening. Over in Juarez, there's not a lot of migrants, so they're not bottling up there on that side of the border. We don't know if it's because they're being sent back further down in Mexico. If Trump gets elected, he said he's going to send troops along the border and seal it. So it may be that, we're only here until January. And if there's no more migrant ministry here, then, maybe Chicago, maybe New York, some of the places we've been sending migrants, maybe we'll have to
be
go there
praying
to
for
do
you.
migrant ministry.
Definitely.
Your
Thank
continued
you.
discernment. Life is
Yeah.
not over right now. There's always something more to do tomorrow.
That's right.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's great talking to you.
Yep.
We hope to see you
Thank
soon.
you.
Take care.
Okay. So,
Tito, I'm going to make a bold statement here and
Go for
say
it.
that is the model that our new province should be following.
I like it. It is hard to sustain, but I think it's definitely a worthy goal.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a financial difficulty of not taking a salary, but there's
Right.
also something pretty important and admirable about living a life of dependency and poverty. And I think we can find somewhere closer to that than we're doing. Let's do it.
Absolutely. Where are we going to do it?
Well, we can't say yet, but I think we should do it.
Yeah, tried to get you on that one, but I have something to confess to you though.
Uh-oh.
So
Is this a purple stole moment?
Sure. This is more of an embarrassment.
Oh, good.
I was 33 years old when I realized that El Paso, Texas, is named that because it is literally the pass between the mountains to get from Mexico to the United States. Like it's the one section where there's an opening in the mountains.
Mm-hmm. You're a 33-year-old Puerto Rican and didn't know what El Paso meant?
I knew what El Paso meant. I just thought it was just like a randomly picked name. It wasn't until I drove by it I was like, oh, mountains, opening.
The pass.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, yeah. Pretty intuitive.
Yeah. Well,
Tito, we hope to have some news for people related to Jim's story.
Yep.
There's something very inspiring about it, and we heard his story last year when we met at our chapter, and you and I have been talking and planning something ever since then. So stuff is in the works. I think this is the model. This is the direction we need to be going. We just hope to be able to share it sometime soon. We want to thank everyone for listening. Just remember, whatever our tagline was, in a world of something, be a minor character.
Bye, Liz.